And like I said in the beginning, is that there is self-realization or cultivation of self, and then there's those that help to guide others to assist in their own cultivation. So we are guides with medicine because we're trying to bring people back to a healthy state, a harmonious state. Then it's up to them, really, what they do with that.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. Blame is such an easy default. There's something satisfying about having a target for our anger, frustration, angst, and disappointment. There's something delicious about blame, about having a place to discharge the static electric residue of rubbing up against the dislikes of existence. Blame flows with an ease that is directly in proportion to the inability to have a straight talk with someone that you're uncomfortable with. It connects the dots of shadow, anxiety, and the part of us that would rather feel superior than work on the self-limiting deficiencies that masquerade as false virtue. Blame gives an instant elevation in status. We can parade how we've been wronged, and grievously so. It's a way to get attention with the light carefully shined on the very best of our features and the worst of the target of your anger. Blame is like the salty, crunchy snack of instant satisfaction. It feels great in the moment as it takes the pressure off a situation that for whatever reason can't be confronted directly. It's that capacity to more directly engage with the source of conflict that leads to better solutions. It's not easy, and if you look around, it's unlikely you'll see many positive examples of how to do this. The media, it runs on the conflict and drama of blame. It juices up political campaigns, and it builds a feeling of community if you can gather people to your cause. We know from the interaction of the 5 phases that blame is related to the pent-up frustration of the wood phase. It's the ministerial fire of the Shaoyang gallbladder itching for a fight. But instead of going at the target of frustration directly, it triangulates in other parties. It takes courage to directly confront the source of our suffering. And sometimes it's not possible if you're up against a societal or cultural issue. On the personal level, it takes courage to risk a relationship that's hit a rough spot and when empathy seems short in supply. This is where the discernment of metal is helpful in restraining the rising fire of Shaoyang wood. On the societal level, I don't know how to dial down the blame at the forces that truly are beyond our control. For sure, there are times when it's helpful to be motivated by the invigorating energy of the gallbladder to break through barriers, and other times when it's more productive to lean on the virtue of the Zhueyin liver with its energy of benevolence so as to be able to create a more just and fair society. Combining the motivation of the gallbladder with the intelligence of the pericardium and its capacity to see how to not throw more gasoline on the flames of misunderstanding, maybe that's a place to start. Especially here in the later part of the Wood Dragon year, a little more empathy for those with whom I disagree and a little more accountability for those with whom I agree, maybe that's a way to dial down the blame. Practicing East Asian medicine is a curious thing. On one hand, we are dealing with the unfolding emergent moment with all the challenge and opportunity that it brings. We are called to work at the edge of a person's health that has shifted to the point that they are seeking help. We deal in real time with individuals as they respond to their desires in the world around them. The work we do, it's informed by the observations, methods, and thinking of doctors from the past. We bring the past into the present. It's curious work when you think about it. In this conversation, we discuss the acupuncture of the Nei Jing with David White. Good ideas and methods that are effective, they tend to persist. We'll get into this in a moment, right after a few words from the folks who have some solutions that you might be looking for. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out their new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AccuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lyle, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com, and where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AccuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit AccuFastNeedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
David White, welcome to Qiological.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for having me.
I am looking forward to our conversation today. You're an acupuncturist, and in particular, you have a focus on Nei Jing Acupuncture.
That's correct. That's my only focus.
Acupuncture from the inner classic. Most people learn their acupuncture from the classic of difficulties, the Nanjing. That's often considered a real classical kind of thing. So Nei Jing Acupuncture, I mean, good gosh, the Yellow Emperor's internal classic. I mean, it's hard to get more of a gold standard. Well, actually, before we get into why or how these are different, I'm always curious to know, Like, whatever took a nice guy like you down the road of acupuncture? I mean, what drew you into this profession anyway? You know, it takes someone who's a little bit non-mainstream to get interested. What drew you in?
Like many people in our profession, I started a journey into martial arts at a very young age, and I was heavily involved in Taekwondo actually as a youngster, and I was training very heavily and competing heavily in that. And then one day I was actually down in the highlands of Tasmania, wandering around as a teenager, as I often did, because I would go down there often. And my brother said, you know, I went past this odd-looking little studio in Mossman, which is a suburb here in Sydney, and saw this Kung Fu place. And it said Kung Fu, traditional Chinese medicine, and I'm sure he pronounced it wrong, but it also said Qigong. He probably said Qigong or something like that. And I thought, well, we have to check this out. And I was so fascinated with Chinese martial arts and Chinese culture. I would have been about 14 or so when I met my teacher there. His name was John Dolick. And I started studying Chinese martial arts with him. After many years of Taekwondo, I ended up giving that up. And we went through all the different styles of martial arts for many years. My brothers and I sort of trained together for about a year. I kept going, and ultimately I'm still a student of his, 30 odd years later. And John was a graduate of the Beijing University of Chinese Medicine. He was the first European actually to graduate from there. And he graduated, must be mid-80s or something. He was originally from Bosnia and then set up practice in Sydney. And originally from Bosnia, went to Beijing Zhongyao Dashi. He went originally to learn the language. He wanted to learn the language, fell in love with the medicine, fell in love with the culture, the martial arts. And basically, that's what happened to me too. He was treating me for some injuries. I thought, this is fantastic. I wasn't doing all that well at school, but I finished school and I said to my parents, I said, I want to do Chinese medicine. I want to do acupuncture. And they supported me 100% and said, let's find a place. So I ended up enrolling at 17 in the Sydney Institute of Traditional Chinese Medicine. And at 21, I went off to China to do an internship and work in a hospital in Anhui. And
that was that.
That was it. Sort of, I was in.
Isn't it interesting? Many of us were not great at, I'm going to say, traditional or regular schooling. It just didn't hold a lot of interest. It's not because we were stupid. We just weren't that interested. But man, you find something that lights you up, and it's like you become unstoppable in terms of wanting to know more.
Absolutely. I did very well in my Chinese medicine studies, actually. Not to boast or anything, but it was purely out of just passion. I just thought, this is fantastic. And I had great teachers. My very first teacher at undergraduate level, and again, I was still a teenager and everything, was Will McLean. And he's he's a brilliant author and practitioner and researcher. And he really ignited a fire in our entire class in that initial sort of, the first 6 months of study, that first semester. I can't remember. He had a falling out or something with the people and ended up leaving. And then we had James Flowers, who's a wonderful teacher and researcher now and doing things. So I was surrounded by some pretty amazing people in early stages of Chinese medicine in Australia.
Yeah, it makes a difference. The thing that's so cool too, learning Chinese medicine is not so easy, right? But when you're interested in something, the stuff that's like air quotes difficult, it's not that it's not difficult, it is difficult, but it like fires you up. It's like you don't want to go around it, you want to go deeper into it.
Yeah, you want the challenge of it. You want to continue to know more, absolutely. And I think that's the beauty of Chinese medicine. It's once you go down that rabbit hole of study, once you start looking at source text, once you start looking at language, once you start looking at the philosophy, like I always joke that I'll never be bored. My life is set for me, and it's been set for me since I was 14 when I went, this is what I want to do. And I'm so fortunate for it. And also I want to do it justice. I want to do that passion, and I want to do the fact that it found me and I found it justice, and keep going.
So you're a curious guy. You're lit up by this stuff. Nei Jing medicine, Nei Jing acupuncture. What set you down that particular rabbit hole?
It's the first text I was introduced to in Chinese medicine through John, and also through my mother buying me I'm trying to remember. There was Ilse of Vise, the first 32 or 33 chapters of the Su Wen. And also, I think it was one of Claude Lary's, the Way of Heaven, the first 2 chapters of the Su Wen. And so she bought me those 2 texts. I think I would have been 15 or 16, when they just sort of come out as a present.
That's really lovely. Your mom really supported you in this.
Yeah, and has since day one and continues to in every way. And I also had a very inquisitive father as well, with culture and languages and everything. He was amazing in that way. So I was pretty lucky. But so that's where it started. And then I went through the standard TCM studies and some research and that sort of thing. But it wasn't until I met a different teacher. I was doing some seminars, like organizing seminars for our association down here. And it was a gentleman called Dr. David Tai, who's quite well known here, very controversially known as well. He's 91, 92 now. And he was a practitioner from Beijing, medical practitioner, like as in modern medical practitioner, who then sort of learned acupuncture through kind of the barefoot program. He was, said, go out here, go learn. And he learned aspects of folk practices. He, like myself, and very much like the Nei Jing, and very much, particularly the Ling Shu, is very, very pragmatic in his approach. He wants a action. He wants a consequence to that action. He wants a result to that action. And when I started, he invited me in a really wonderful manner through a beautiful letter to come study with him, because I'd organized these seminars. So he knew that I was interested. And I also had an interest in spinal cord injury and stroke rehabilitation treatments. And that was his forte at the time. And so I just started observing him in practice and observing particularly his needling, which is phenomenal. And he'd very busy practice, in the morning we'd see 60 odd people and in his house. And I just observed for about 3+ years. And then finally he said, okay, now we can start to talk a bit more of the theoretical components of that. And he talks, I would say, in a more modern manner. He always had a bit of trouble discussing classical medicine in classical terms to Westerners. He had that issue. He also didn't, well, not just to Westerners, to anyone, really. He wanted to translate it into modern components because he thought that's what people wanted. And probably still thinks it. But I've kind of gone the other way, and I said to him, no, I want to know it from that classical material. I want to know those texts. I want to know that. And that's what we worked on. And his focus particularly was needling technique and aspects of diagnosis. And then I've kind of taken the reins in terms of my own inquiry into the Nei Jing. And to be honest, since about 2005, 2006, I don't think I've read another book in Chinese medicine except the Nei Jing. So that's it. I read books associated with the culture of the Nei Jing, the early culture of the pre-Qin and Han dynasties, but I don't really look at many other things unless it was something I had to I taught undergraduate acupuncture for 20 years here in Sydney. So unless it was something I needed to for that, I didn't really have an interest in it. So that it grabbed me completely, and I'm thankful for it.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit, David Tai. Tell me a little bit about his needling. It sounds like it was a bit extraordinary.
Yeah. Look, he had a superb. Well, it all started with insertion technique. He just had a superb, as in freehand needling. I don't have, and I don't think I've touched a guide tube since I was an undergraduate myself. So superb needling technique in terms of that insertion, initial connection. And then his focus really, and this is what I teach now with teaching, I focus of my seminars that I teach, which is Ling Shu Chapter 7, the Guanzhen needling techniques, was on level-based needling. And that was a really important aspect of understanding precisely what level you want to communicate with, you want to infiltrate with the tool you're using. I say tool, but I mean what needle, but obviously in the Nei Jing, we have the Jiaozhen, we have the 9 needles. So, we have that understanding of how we're going to impact pathological change, pathological manifestation at different levels. And that was a real clear aspect of his needling techniques and insertion techniques as well. And that insertion technique being part of needling techniques, but the insertion being that primary contact was just incredible to watch. And it's something I've mimicked for a long time.
Yeah. What was so extraordinary about that initial insertion? I mean, that is, of course, a powerful moment with acupuncture.
Yeah.
Right. For the patient, because they're kind of like, okay, what's going to happen? And of course, for the practitioner, like, how present am I?
Yeah, I think, I often talk about medicine as being communication. It's a conveyance between practitioner, it's a conveyance between patient, and that needle is our messenger. And that approach in terms of initial insertion is that, it all comes back to Ling Shu Chapter 1 of guarding the Shen and guarding the concept of Ji. It's about that initial subtle response that's going to occur inside that person. So the insertion has to be so precise. It also comes down to this idea, as I said, of levels, in terms of you may want to infiltrate a certain level that has a pathological manifestation without damaging any aspect of something that is healthy. So if you have a disease that's at the level of the bone, you don't want to go through and damage the skin and the muscles and the vessels and so forth prior to getting there. That's why you have certain techniques like Duanzi in Ling Shu Chapter 7 is about getting straight to the bone, or Shutsu of the 5 techniques, getting straight to the bone without damaging the other tissues. So that initial insertion sometimes is not just something that goes to some superficial portion of the channel system. It's something that can go right to the depths immediately. But at the same time, sometimes you need to go just superficially. So that initial insertion I find to be such an important aspect of teaching people to needle, but also our immediate connection to pathology.
So you're saying that with the insertion, there's a level that you're looking for. There's a target that you have in mind in the beginning. It's not just, I'm going to get this in and make it comfortable and then go fishing for chi. It sounds like you're really aiming at something.
Well, yes. So it does depend on the method. I mean, if you're trying to supplement a certain region or certain point or channel, whatever you're trying to do, supplementation is a little bit different because you will sort of get it comfortable and then fish. That's understandable, and you will do that method. But when you're dealing with the majority of pathologies, which, if we're talking Nei Jing specifically, if we're talking the Ling Shu, the majority of the pathology are contraction-based cold illnesses, which is big. So, obstruction-based illnesses. And you're going to have to do an element of extraction to that area. So you're going to have to create an opening, or you're going to have to create a movement to impact those tissues to create that change. And that's where you don't want to allow that pathogen, whatever it may be, but let's say it's cold in this instance, you don't want to allow that pathogen to impact or become lodged in another area of our channel system. So we need to make sure that we are needling to that level in the most direct, precise manner we can. And that's also so we can communicate appropriately with that unseen component of the channel system that, we're working on the surface. So that unseen component, so we can engage the Shen appropriately to facilitate the response in that area. Because we've got to communicate with that Shen in order to say, this is where the problem is. As acupuncturists, we create irritation. That's all we do, right? It's very simple. We use a tool, create irritation, hopefully that irritation tells that body where the issue is, and we start to create change. So if you can do that in the most precise, perfect manner, then that is where you're going to create the biggest change. And so that is, again, goes back to that very famous quote in the Ling Shu, which is guarding the Shen or guarding the Ji.
Tell me a little more about that.
About the guarding the Shen, guarding the Ji sort of thing?
Yes.
Well, I recently just gave a talk, so I hope I'm not repeating too much of that on this. But the Ji is it's that trigger mechanism. And Shen, obviously, we translate as spirit, but it's the illumination of the unseen sort of components. It is that idea that we as physicians are trying to communicate and talk with the body and that sort of unknown element of their being. So when we're needling, I mean, the famous sort of quote in the Ling Shu is the inferior guard the physical form, the Xing, while the superior are guarding the Shen, and the inferior guard the trigger, while the superior guarding the Ji, okay, or the trigger or guan. But Ji itself is the trigger mechanism. And really it comes in relation to, I would say, like precision and timing in our treatment in terms of communication with whether it's tissues or whether it's the patient, whatever you're actually trying to communicate with. And then it's also this understanding of a very subtle, very light, almost unrecognizable impact that we create on the individual, on the channel, wherever we're working, that has long, far-reaching consequence. And that's a really important aspect of Chinese medicine. It's kind of like the butterfly effect, right? It's kind of that very subtle work that is going to have that far-reaching impact or consequence there. So it's a really it's an action efficient.
Yes, very disproportionate results given the input.
So it's action efficiency in needling is where it comes down to it. So we have to make sure that every component of our actions in terms of needling, perfect in how we communicate with whatever level we're dealing with. And that to me is the ultimate manifestation of guarding those two components.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. So let me make sure I'm following this. So Shen, I've got kind of a sense, spirit as we think of it. There's a lot you could talk about with that. Qi is like a mechanism. I know the character in Chinese literally means mechanism, or even machine to some degree. Right. Originally meant the mechanism of crossbody. When you're talking about Qi, are you talking about like the trigger event for an illness, or the underlying dynamic of an illness? I'm trying to grasp what Qi means in this context.
So in this context, it is the underlying mechanism of our action, because ultimately, if we're dealing with that crossbow metaphor, then it's our action of we are pulling the trigger, but we're doing so understanding that this unseen mechanism is the character, is what is the action behind that pulling of the trigger, right? The pulling of the trigger is that superficial manifestation of it. The mechanism is the unseen manifestation of it. So it's our action there, but also the understanding that within that's one understanding of it. The other understanding is that it is the pathological changes, the pathological dynamic change is another way that people talk about mechanism, and how we have to time then our needling and time our insertion or time our understanding of pathological process as well within that, to know when things are changing, know when that dynamic changing, to intercept it at the right time, or to intervene at the right time, if that makes sense.
I think it does. Let me just run this by you to make sure that I'm getting it. I love this stuff. Sorry, I'm a little bit geeky. In the Chinese characters, it's like there's so much in them. You could just unpack and unpack and unpack. So if I'm understanding you correctly, when you're talking about Qi, we're talking about an underlying dynamic within the patient that their illness is kind of constellated around, but we're also talking about the way in which we interact with that through our needling. It's both of those. It's not one or the other. It's both of those. So do I have that piece right?
Yeah, because Qi ultimately is that initial subtleness of something, of whatever that something is. So if it's from our perspective, it's the same with Shen, right? From our perspective, we have to engage Shen. We are using Shen to engage Shen. Shen is, if you take it, this idea of the illumination of something in terms of it's bringing light to physiology or pathology or our needling technique, or it's the way that we sort of receive and perceive information, so that becomes Shen within diagnostics, but then also within how the patient receives and perceives information in terms of our medical intervention, whether it's, touch or whether it's needling, whatever. So it's the same thing with Qi, is that subtleness of a something is both in what we as practitioners engage, and then what with inside their body, whatever engagement is happening there, whether it's from a pathological or pathophysiological manifestation, and change.
And this is why it's so important then, as you were just talking about earlier, that there's a specific level that you're interested in. And so part of that G aspect is knowing where and how to place that needle in relationship to what's happening in the patient.
That's right. That's right. And that's that idea of, within that same aspect of Ling Shu Chapter 1, it talks about the empty spaces, because it's in the empty spaces that we have to find that subtle change. We have to recognize and try to work with that subtle change. So it says something along those lines of the action of the mechanism doesn't actually ever leave that of the empty spaces. So it's always within those empty spaces. And that's ultimately what we work with in acupuncture, is emptiness, is the space in between things.
No, it's such a weird thing, isn't it?
It is. It's a wonderful thing.
Because like the tacit agreement of medicine is we're supposed to do something, right? We're supposed to be taking action, skilled action. We know what we're doing. We understand the pathology. We know how to help people. And for sure there's that. At the same time, there's this thing about uncertainty and empty spaces. And that also plays in. It's a very weird thing about East Asian medicine, that on one hand, we're looking to really work with something formed and unfolding, but we often do it in ways that are, like you said, we work with the empty spaces.
Yeah, but I still am a strong believer that acupuncture ultimately is performative. It's about action and consequence. It's about results, and it's a skill knowledge. And that reflects the thinkers of early China as well. They were not trying to figure out what a good person was back then. They were trying to figure out how to be a good person. And it's the same way. We're not trying to go, well, what is a healthy person? We're trying to say, well, how can we bring these people, how can we guide these individuals to health? So it's got to be action, consequence, result-based work. And sometimes in order to excel at that sort of performative practice of acupuncture, we have to work in the unusual. We have to work in that element of something that we just simply cannot grasp or physically grasp in the immediate sort of space. It is that empty, unseen component, and we have to make that hidden component manifest in whatever way that we do, whether it's our own internal gaze or whether it's through understanding and palpation. We have to work with that emptiness, and we have to cultivate that emptiness in the patient, in ourselves, without getting too philosophical.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is the philosophical piece. Actually, I think many people were drawn to this because the philosophy is like really interesting, something evocative about it, right? In a sense, what I think I hear you saying is we have to be able to touch and navigate and work within the unseen, untouchable realm.
Correct. We must, in order to appropriately understand that mechanism of the disease and of our own doing.
Yes, and create some substantial results for our patients. Of course, that's what we're looking for.
Yes. I mean, that's the only thing we should be looking for. I mean,
of course. But here we are working in the dark.
we are. We're working in the dark, but we're meant to be bringing light to it, right? That's engaging the Shen. That's guarding the Shen. We are bringing light to that darkness. And I love that. I love the philosophy of Chinese medicine and what surrounds it. But I do have an issue with those looking like the Nei Jing is not. It's not. What's the term? Soteriological. It's not. You're not going to find salvation in the Nei Jing. And I think a lot of people love to think that they're going to find salvation in these classical texts. They will find salvation in the culture that surrounds the Nei Jing, or in the texts that may. And no, I don't mean in a theological sort of salvation. I mean, an understanding of self-realization. They will find that in the texts that maybe informed the authors of the Nei Jing, or the composers of the editors of the Nei Jing. But the Nei Jing itself that's not where I would go in order to understand myself from a greater perspective, because it's a medical text. That's why I said it's pragmatic. It's about technique, and particularly the Ling Shu is. The Ling Shu is very straightforward. It's starts off with Huangdi going, the people are good, they pay their taxes, but they also don't really pay their taxes that well, and it's mainly because they're sick. How can I make them better? What can we do? I want to develop a medical system that's better.
So I can collect more taxes.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. That's pretty. And so Chibo goes, that's great. I've got the system for you. It's based around the small needles, the Shaoxin or Weizhen. You know, so it's around these small needles. There's 9 of them because 9 is the greatest number, and you can impact the body through certain areas, and that's the 12 yuan source points or source regions, right? And that's chapter 1. That's what it says. It says here's your tool set, and we can kind of start to talk the body. And then as you go through, I always harp on about the first 13 chapters of the Ling Shu, because you could base lifetimes of practice just off those first 13 chapters. It says, well, you know, he starts talking about diagnostics. He starts talking about movements to specific regions. He starts talking about the clarification of those, which is, I think, the add-in of that chapter, which is chapter 3. Then it's into diagnostics. And he starts talking about like thoracic circulatory assessment. He goes into later in Ling Shu chapter 9, Jingmai unilateral circulatory assessment. He goes into then the actual channels, the diseases, and so forth. It's very pragmatic, very straightforward. This is your tool set. This is where to put them. This is what they're used for. And that's how it goes on. And it's all something you've seen before. Every time they talk about something in the Ling Shu, it's, you know, well, here's the channels. Well, guess what? Those channels are rivers. We've seen them before. And here they are. It's also how we structure our cities, or, you know, how we approach agriculture, or what you might see up in the sky. That clear structure of the Ling Shu, I think, is such an important aspect of, you know, the approach to the Nei Jing as a medical text, and not taking it on as purely a philosophical approach to life, because there's better books for that. Huainanzi, Guanzi, Dao De Jing, Zhuangzi, all those books are fantastic. They're the ones which can give us that concept of self-realization. But as physicians, we need to be ones that help guide people back to health. Then they can take it from there and you know.
So don't look to the Nei Jing for self-realization. Look to the Nei Jing as a how-to manual.
That's right. But if you fall in love with the Nei Jing, then you go, well, I want to learn about the culture that surrounds it. And that's where that self-realization comes into it. That's where that study comes into it, and is absolutely vital, in my opinion. I'm not trying to put it down, because it's something I spend a lot of work for myself on. But in the clinic, in terms of just sort of raw mechanical expression of what the Nei Jing is, and particularly the Ling Shu is, well, it's stick needles into people here and there and do these techniques with these tools.
Can you walk me through what a treatment would look like? Right? I've got a good sense of what a TCM treatment looks like, because, look, we all walked through the gate of TCM to get to where we got. That's just a historical artifact of how the medicine came from China into the West. So there's that. You know, I'm not getting in. You know, I don't want to get into you know, TCM's good, bad, blah blah blah. It's a gate that we all walk through. It's a language that we all learned. That's actually helpful for any aspect of medicine we want to talk about. But it sounds to me like a Nei Jing treatment. You're going to think different. You're going to treat different. You're going to have a different approach. Can you walk me through what a moment in your clinic would look like with working with somebody?
Absolutely. And I should say that I'm not anti-TCM or any other style of acupuncture or Chinese medicine. I'm just not interested in any other style of acupuncture or Chinese medicine.
You know what you like and you go for it.
Yeah. I'm an elitist bastard, as I often call myself when I'm teaching. You know, I know what I like.
Put that on your business card. David White, elitist bastard acupuncturist.
Yeah, I think people would agree with the latter. Yeah. In terms of developing, in terms of how we're applying it in day to day, I mean, if someone comes in, regardless of what their presentation is, you're gathering information. Now, the first thing is that, you know, you're always trying to, from a very broad perspective, start to differentiate that disease. And that's no different. TCM, Nei Jing, doesn't matter. You're trying to differentiate that disease. So often the very first thing I'm doing is I'm putting a seasonal sort of overlay on that. How is their disease? How is their body? How is their environment manifesting seasonally? That's the first thing. So that's even just in questioning, we'll start to get that understanding. Sort of where is their body breathing? How is it breathing? And so forth. Okay. And then from there, and that can be yin-yang differentiation, environmental impacts, all those sorts of things. That's all part of it. You're starting to get that picture of how that's sort of what's manifesting in this individual's life that's leading to them to basically be here in the first place. So that's the sort of the initial questioning. From more the diagnostic perspectives, one important aspect of the Nei Jing is to divide those diagnostics into very clear pictures of where illness is residing within inside the body. It's something I have been talking about a little bit, which is processional pathological metamorphosis, as in where is disease lodging within the body, what is happening as it lodges, and what is happening then as it changes, and then where is it going to actually end up going. So how disease is actually traveling through these structures and systems. So diagnostics become important. So the first thing is observational diagnostics and palpation, right? So from an observational perspective or palpation perspective, I'm dividing the channel system up, or I'm dividing the entire body up. So I'm going to observe what's happening in the most superficial portions of the channel system, whether it's the Jing, so it's what's the scaffolding of the body look like, how is that scaffolding working, how are those structures moving, so forth, and then also the Lo. And because the Lo are visible blood vessels, the Lo Bie, what people call Lo connecting points, the Lo Bie, we're looking at the vessels, looking at the quality of those vessels, and looking for whatever pathological manifestation may be happening in those vessels. And then I'm going to look at the sort of longitudinal pattern pathways, which are the Jing, and that's the Jing Mai particularly, and that's going to be Ren Yin Chen Ko pulse diagnosis. So that's pulse at the neck and wrist simultaneously, and that's that kind of unilateral Jing patterned circulatory assessment is kind of how I would talk about that. And that is a huge part of my practice, and that's something I've been teaching for a long time. Understanding strength, understanding abundancy or deficiency or whatever you want to call it within those channels, but dividing them mentally as you go through your practice is really important. I would also be looking at Sambu Joho, which is the 3 levels, 9 indicators, pulse diagnosis, which is looking at positional circulatory assessment of the pulses around the body, pulse at the wrist, at the ankles, sometimes around the groin, mostly around the head. I look at that as well. What's happening in those pulses? Are the channels circulating properly? Is substance getting through to certain areas? And if they're not, why not? Is it obstruction? Is it abundance? Is it lacking? Whatever. And then, of course, as most people do, Qiko, or Chenko pulse diagnosis at the wrist to understand what's happening in the organs. And in the Nei Jing, it's actually very pragmatic. It's an anatomical structure. What's happening in the upper, middle, and lower jiao, sometimes a bit above that in the throat, sometimes a bit below that in the hips and legs. But what's happening in those sections? And I approach that, I would say, in a somewhat simplified manner, based heavily on Ling Shu Chapter 4, which goes through essentially 8 qualities, because they're kind of the primary qualities. From there, everything else comes from that again. We overlay on top of that, though, this understanding of seasonal patterning as well. So you have the seasonal pulse qualities and disease pulse qualities and so forth. We go through that. Now you're going to have a picture of what's happening in different sections of the body and how those are actually corresponding and communicating with one another. Is there an obstruction within the Jingmai? Is that obstruction happening or affecting the Zhang? Is it affecting, how that person moves, how that person breathes, how that person, functions, how their bowels are functioning, all those sorts of things? You're just going to start to have that understanding, and sort of you get this sort of cross-sectional component of where that is. And you slowly just tick the boxes off and refine and define where you need to go and where you need to needle. Now, you may look at needling that person in these different areas all at once. It may happen that way. You may end up going, well, I just need to impact this one particular little area, and I know that's going to create enough change for this to be effective. Sometimes that might be bleeding a low point or low separation, so actually bleeding that vessel, that's where the disease was lodged that was kickstarting everything else. Other times it may be 57 points in the back. No, I'm joking. But, it may be something along those lines where you're doing something more drastic. It may be needling to the bone, to rub that bone with that needle, again, for cold that's affecting the bone. It may be that you're lighting that needle on fire and doing fire needling for the sake of cold damaging tendons. So it just depends. But you've got to make sure that you are giving the body the right information, again, going back to communication, and saying this is where we need to create change. You do have to be careful, I think, in this system to not try to do it all at once, because then you will just confuse the body.
Oh, spot on. I think one of the biggest problems that I've created for people over time in my clinic is trying to do too much. I'm going to do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Oh, I'm going to put in a needle or two, like just in case for something. And whenever I've got that, I'm going to put in a needle just to cover my bases idea, it means I have not clearly seen how these dominoes are lined up. And at least in my experience, I think I've caused more trouble for people with overtreatment than by using undertreatment.
Yes. And I think that's a problem within sort of the modern landscape of Chinese medicine. And I may be part of that problem because I also teach, is that there is just so much information out there. I used to joke with a former colleague, kind of call them the ghosts of TCM. They used to just wander weekend to weekend from seminar to seminar. They'd pick up that information, practice it for a week, pick up new information, practice it for a week. And you end up just making a mess for yourself. So I think style is so important. I think defining that style and refining that and repeating that style enough that you can just naturally, spontaneously apply it, in when it needs to be applied is so important. That's that level of mastery I think that we all should sort of strive for.
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner. Because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital qi, and that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
It really takes time, though.
Yeah, it does.
I mean, to take time to really go into a system, understand how it's working, understand how it's not working. I had a teacher who used to say this was about herbs, and he'd say, look, you can say you understand an herb or a formula when you've used it and it's worked, and you've used it and it hasn't, and in both instances, you know why.
Yes.
Right? That takes a lot of time. And I know in our modern world, we like to mash things up and we like to mix things together, and you can be innovative, but man, when it comes to learning an acupuncture technique, or a way of working, I mean, to me, you're going to spend a year or two like just digging into that. It really takes time.
Oh yeah, if not longer. And I've always taught that every technique or every needle, every place insertion, whatever way you want to approach it, has to have time and place. It has to have a purpose. In every action that is given to that tool must have purpose, because again, we have to precisely communicate with. We're in the dark, as you said. You can't stab blindly in the dark. You're going to hurt someone. You're going to take someone's eye out. We have to slowly and carefully make sure that every movement that we do is perfect. It kind of harps back to that idea of Cook Ding in Zhuangzi. He comes across a knot in this oxen, and he says, well, I have to, take into consideration any difficulties that I come across. I have to then focus. I have to then slow my movement. And then once I've done all those things, then I'm going to start to cut. And when I cut in this manner, then the oxen just simply falls apart.
Right. Yeah. It's such a great story. And he talks about this. You've talked about it. It's the empty spaces, right? I put my knife into the empty spaces.
Yeah. That is Ji in action. Is Cook Ding. It's perfection in terms of what we should be trying to achieve as acupuncturists. And that's why I think, and why my focus again has been so much on needling technique, And I used to say, reverse engineering needling technique, reverse engineering the Guanzen, which is Ling Shu Chapter 7, taking 27 techniques, exploring those techniques from a practical perspective, how you hold the needle, how you needle, all those sorts of things, and then breaking down their diseases that they are meant to approach. Because in that chapter, you just go through and some are for supplementation, some are for deficiency, most are for pathological manifestations of cold and contraction, as I mentioned before. But what are you going to do if that cold sits at the most superficial portion of a channel system? What is your needling going to look like? What happens if it's now in the depths? And it's just got to be perfect, every time. That needling technique has to be, as close to perfect as we need to be. I'm not completely a perfectionist, but it needs to be that way.
Right. It has to be the right message, right? A message that you're sending to the bone level is different than a message that you're sending to the superficial level. It's like working with a team of people. You have to know who's good at what, and then give them clear directions on what to do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We've got 9 of them in acupuncture, so you got to make sure. Yeah, no, that's right. There's nothing wrong in modern day practices where people are using multiple styles, as long as they know what each of those styles represent appropriately. And I still think people have to approach that with caution, because you do end up mixing things up in practice in a unusual manner sometimes, and it can lead to, either nothing happening or disasters happening, which is neither. We don't want either of those outcomes. But you just need to make sure that the message you're giving, but you need to understand the principle behind that message is really important. I think that's where the classics really shine, and not just the Nei Jing. This would be the Nanjing, the Shanghan Zabing, is that they are principled texts. They are principled in their approach. They're principled in their, like I said, their cultures that surround them. This is kind of like that ethnographic sort of inquiry that we should take as scholar physicians into these texts, is that we are trying to, like hermeneutics. I'm not sure if you know what hermeneutics are, but that understanding of, we're trying to develop as much as we can the lens of the author, the impact that was sort of, how that author was impacted by their surroundings, their lifestyles, their texts that they've read, to then come to the conclusions that we're now reading. So it's that idea of immersion within that, but for the idea of developing the lens of that author.
Okay. I had a patient the other day. This guy's in his 90s. Pretty vital. Interesting dude. He conducts like community orchestras. He loves music. And he conducts, community orchestras. These are not giant orchestras. These are not super professionals. These are community people that love music, and he conducts them, and it brings him tremendous joy, which I suspect is part of his longevity. But he was telling me the other day, this was so great. He was telling me, oh yes, we're going to do this Mozart, and then we're doing a Wagner. And the Wagner is the last of the Wagners of his romantic age. And you can see in this last symphony of his romantic period, everything that's going to come in the next phase of what he does. And he talked about, through understanding the music of this particular, last piece of Wagner's development, that he could see into Wagner's mind and how this would unfold going forward. And he talked about glimpsing the mind of the artist, right? And his eyes and his voice and his spirit. I felt like I'd just gotten a tremendous lesson from a master about grasping something of the brilliance of people who have brilliance that drives them through their life. I think this is what you're talking about.
I think so, yeah. I suppose as acupuncturists, then we're conducting that orchestra. I always joked that acupuncturists were just janitorial, that we were just doing cleanup. But I think your picture is much more beautiful there.
Well, just in terms, it's not so much like the what we do. It's that what you were just talking about with hermeneutics, the capacity to glimpse the mind of these people who really had something. It's not about what they do. It's more about how they are.
Absolutely. And to harp back to what we're talking about with Ji and empty spaces and the unseen, to do that with the Nei Jing is really difficult because we don't know who they are. We are trying to develop a lens of individuals, not just one individual, of multiple individuals who would have compiled these works, and we don't know anything about them. All we know is the era in which they lived, and so therefore we have to immerse ourselves into that era as best we can. And I actually think that makes it more interesting.
But we know something of the music that they wrote down.
Yeah, absolutely. It's beautiful. It would be like, finding a sheet of music which it was the most beautiful music you've ever heard. Doesn't matter who wrote it, but you know what era, what time it was done in history, what time it was compiled in history, and going, what brought them to this? And we are quite lucky with these classics in that we know the era that early Chinese historians were magnificent at keeping records, and we had so many wonderful texts in that era, and I'm sure there's so many more to come that may be buried and whatnot, and there's many more to be studied. But I mean, to be honest, we have enough at the moment to last millennia in terms of that study. But yeah, it's a wonderful thing. We have the music. Now we just need to properly learn how to play it, though, because remember, it is about application. It is performative. We need to know how to play it to effect of some kind.
Yes, of course. What I think I hear you saying is there's an aspect of cultivation incumbent upon us. And look, there's other people in that time that the Nei Jing was written that talked to us about the cultivation piece, all right? Zhuangzi, Lao Tzu, all right? And then there's the actual playbook, which is the Nei Jing itself. Here's how you do it. Here are the steps.
Yes, although in my opinion, they're all playbooks. Like Zhuangzi is a playbook to how to approach life, and Tao Te Ching as well, to how to approach governance, and the Huainanzi to how to approach all of it. But they're not medical texts. So this is the playbook of medicine. And like I said in the beginning, is that there is self-realization or cultivation of self, and then there's those that help to guide others to assist in their own cultivation. So we are guides with medicine because we're trying to bring people back to a healthy state, a harmonious state. Then it's up to them, really, what they do with that. If they want to go down the path of self-cultivation, it's there for them. If we want to go down our own path, it's there for us as well. But in terms of medicine, we still have to, there is a limit to medicine. In my opinion, there's a limit to medicine in terms of the patient-practitioner interaction of that level of cultivation that can be achieved, because the rest is up to the individual.
Well, yes, of course. And look, I don't know about you. I look at the people that come into my clinic, they, by and large, are not interested in self-cultivation. They're interested in whatever problem they have going away. Honestly, I don't think I'm that much different. I mean, some of the problems I have in my life, I would just like them to change. Ideally, with as little effort on my part as possible. It's great sometimes that you can put a few needles in and create dramatic change.
Yeah, absolutely. But maybe that's all these individuals need, is that little bit of change to ease the burden that's on them, so that with less effort, so they can somehow enact wu-wei within themselves, even if they don't know what it is, they can find a better sense of being. And that's maybe where we come in as medical guides, or whatever you want to call us, to create that change. And we might only do it in 1 in 10 or 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000, but it might happen. And that would be a wonderful thing.
It raises the question for me as a practitioner. And I think about this often, what am I doing in my clinic? Again, people come in with a problem. They want help with it. I want to help them with it. But in terms of how they take it and digest it, and it may change their life, or may change their relationships, I feel as a practitioner, a lot of that is not really in my hands. And in some ways, it's not really my business. Right? People are not coming in and asking for, I want to live a more enlightened and connected life. I mean, people really are asking for that. And I'm not sure that it's my place to impose my idea of what might be good for them onto them.
I agree with you. I think on the table sort of work, I think we need to know where our place is. Interestingly, it is a question that sometimes gets passed into my clinic, and I get patients, as I get to know them as well. They ask about, aspects of my own inquiry into meditation or self-realization, whatever you want to call it. They ask about that. And it's funny, I often find with patients, I have to kind of create this divide in myself and my own interests. Like it's something I might be able to teach them differently, separately from there on the table, because I'm kind of in that, I've got my physician hat on and I want to make sure that I'm working within that. So I have to create that sort of divide within that. So often my response to those things are very simple. And it goes back to I have a loose background in like Chan Buddhism and things like that, where Dogen just said his answers to the keys to meditation was just sit. So I'm often overly simplistic to them to say, well, just learn how to breathe, or just breathe, just sit, just do this. Keep it simple, and then often they do take on that one thing. Then they can complicate it after that if they need to, or once they actually put some time into it. But I find that some practitioners often try to overly complicate things from the get-go, and all that does is create greater confusion. It's like same with needling, right? If we're doing multiple methods, or we're just putting a needle in for the sake of putting a needle in, that confusion there can be a dangerous thing, and you can actually put them off course sometimes with that. So my answers become very simplistic. Funnily, I know we're doing a podcast here. I don't particularly like talking to people, so I keep my answers as simple as I can.
That's funny. I know I've got some friends, different practitioners, and sometimes we talk about, we don't really like people that much.
Oh, yeah, I love the medicine. I don't like the people. Yeah.
But, I mean, David, you're making a really potent point here. And I know it's something that it's like my clinical practice beat into me over the years, which is quite often, Michael Max, shut the hell up. Like, unless a patient is asking for some direction, or if they're asking for, like, what should I do with my diet, or asking for some kind of lifestyle direction, or, I hate the word advice, but I'll use it because it's a, reasonable enough word. Like, unless people are asking for something, don't offer it, because it becomes a burden to them, right? It's like too many needles. It's a burden. It's like extra stuff. They didn't want it. They're not asking for it. They're not ready for it. They're not receptive. Now they've got this extra thing that just came in that they actually have to digest out in some way. And I've found in my own practice, in the attempt to be helpful and to help guide people onto a maybe more useful path, I think I've created a lot of trouble for folks because they weren't interested.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Less is more. And the people of today already have too much. We've got too much information. We've got way too much materialistic stuff. For the majority of people, they only want more, and they want it here and now. I think sometimes just that stillness and that quiet that is developed inside clinical practice, particularly, I think, at a huge advantage of acupuncture. But that stillness that we can cultivate in them through nothing is so important. It harks back to non-coercive action and allowing things to just spontaneously develop there on the table, there in our practice. And from there we sort of step outside of just that pragmatic aspect of acupuncture, and the needles become teacher that way, because we shut our mouths, but the needles do the talking. And I think from that it becomes, acupuncture really becomes a magnificent guide. And actually beyond that, it's not just us shutting our mouths, often it's the patient too, that they need to come in and they need to pause. I often talk to students about medical pause, that we come in, we have to take time to pause. Going back to Cook Ding, he slows down, he considers things. But that's also why people are often seeking us out as practitioners, to slow down and to take time. When I practice, like with Nei Jing needling techniques, a lot of the techniques are very active. We're doing work constantly. And that can sometimes be, that in itself can be a burden or exhausting or exhaustive to that person in a certain way. Obviously, I'm not trying to exhaust them. We've got to be conscious of what we're working with. But in some instances, if I'm done needling and the needling's done, the pulses are there, I'll just let the patient lie there. They don't need to even have needles in them. They just need to have that time and that stillness. And whether it's quiet, whether it's music, whether it's something there, just away from their lives, away from the waiting place. It's the old Dr. Seuss book, how lucky you are. I can't remember what book it is. I've got a 1-year-old, that's why I'm thinking Dr. Seuss. But it is the waiting place where people just wait. They wait for the bus. They wait for this. They wait for their boss to do something. That. But then they can come to us and they can have a bit of, maybe that is the salvation in Nei Jing. Maybe I should take that back. Maybe that's where it comes through, that practice. is in the fact that we can give them space, and we are working with that space, but we can give them space to just be themselves.
Well, or introduce them to the space they've already got that they've forgotten about.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, so often we've all had the experience, we walk back into a room and it is different and the person is different, and you look at their face and the way that they've organized whatever their like resting continence is, just the way they hold the tensions, it's different, right? The way they hold their body, it's different, right? Their breathing goes into parts of their abdomen that it didn't go into before. Again, I love your idea of these empty spaces. There is something in there, and it's a little bit mysterious. As practitioners, we have an opportunity to touch it and interact with it, but what that does for our patients can be profoundly transformative. And it's not the doing part, it's the not doing, it's the way, it's the way, it's the doing, not doing.
Yeah, that's right. It's the doing, not doing. I mean, absolutely. It is that, it goes back to that, to work in the unseen, to work in that darkness. I mean, sometimes if you're in a dark room, if you're trapped in that dark room, the best thing to do is be still and listen. And that's what we're doing. That's what, and our needles are our ears in this instance, or maybe it's our hands, whatever it is. But that stillness is just such a vital aspect of listening, learning, and bringing light to something that we may not have seen in the first place.
Wow. Well, David White, that's an evocative place to maybe put a pin in it for today.
We might have to revisit another date.
Yeah, sometimes I think about doing like 3-hour conversations. You know, it seems like after an hour, you're just getting warmed up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the link between Wu Wei and clinical practice and being a physician is so important. I mean, you know, I'm sorry to keep going. I know we're wrapping this up, but there's that, you know, I think it's Aristotle. He said, you know, in order to be a just person, you need to take up just acts. You know, you have to behave in a just manner. And it's the same. In order to be a physician, we have to undertake medical activity, but in order to cultivate, we have to undertake that component of stillness, in order to help us realize, you know, self-realization. You know, you have to embody it in that way. And there's so many different avenues and factors in the classics in the acupuncture and Chinese medicine that allow us to embody everything about the culture and the medicine and the application of it. It's a wonderful thing.
It's much more than learning a few techniques.
Yeah, but the techniques can be the tool that open up our eyes, and that's
Yes. Great. Well, thank you for your time today. This has been very thought-provoking. I now want to go back and look at the Ling Shu, thinking about what we've talked about today, see if I might notice things in there that I haven't noticed before. So I appreciate this.
Yeah, you'll notice the empty spaces.
Notice the empty spaces. Yeah, I mean, it's the empty spaces. I mean, that's tricky, right? The empty spaces don't exactly have neon signs saying, look at me.
No, absolutely not.
It's the opposite.
That's why acupuncture points, the character shows it's a cave, and we're going in a deep, dark cave, and we've got to explore that. And we're doing it without a flashlight, you know. We're throwing a piece of steel down there, you know, hoping to hear it hit the walls, figure out where it's going.
Well, it sounds like we're more than throwing. If I follow you correctly from this conversation today, there's a lot of intent, there's a lot of focus, and beyond that, there's a target of what you're aiming at. And it's different for different points, and it's different for different situations. It sounds like in your diagnostics, you're getting a sense of the lay of the land, and then that gives you a clue as to where to intervene and see what happens.
Exactly. Precision. And then reflection, precision.
Wonderful. If people want to find you, where are you on the internet?
My teaching institute is called the Institute of Nei Jing Research, on Instagram, on Facebook, and instituteofneijingresearch.com is my website. And also Classical Acupuncture Sydney is my clinic website as well. And but people in regards to Nei Jing studies in any way they're welcome to reach out to me. Well, I am starting a course next year through ICOM in the UK. It's going to get run for around 20 months, studying all aspects of the Ling Shu Jing. So that will be quite exciting, I think.
That sounds like it'll be fun for you.
Yeah, hopefully it's fun for others. Yeah.
All right. Well, again, David, thank you so much for your time today. This has been delightful.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's been really wonderful. Enjoyed it.
I always enjoy conversations with people who've gotten a whiff of something and how that sets them off on a path of discovery. I resonate with David's thoughts about acupuncture as a tool of communication, how each needle carries a message, how it connects the seen and the unseen within the body. Working with the empty spaces, it's a reminder that true healing often happens in those quiet, unoccupied places where the body can realign itself. I appreciate how he challenged the notion of doing more, emphasizing that sometimes the most impactful treatments are the simplest ones. It's about precision, intention, and trusting that less can actually do more. The art of acupuncture, as David describes it, it's about knowing when to step back, let the needle speak, and give the body some space to heal. If there's one thing to take away from today, it's that subtlety and simplicity in practice can create profound change. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.